She was 8 months pregnant, standing alone in an 11,000 square foot house, holding a coffee she never touched. And something inside her, quiet, clear, and certain, said, "Something is wrong. Not a panic, not a spiral, just the truth, landing like a fact on a page." Her husband came home early that morning, said nothing real, left again. And Claire Ashford, the billionaire's wife, the woman who had everything, began to understand that everything she had built her life around was a lie. What happened next would strip her down to nothing. No house, no husband, no plan. 8 months pregnant and completely alone. But here's the question that will stay with you long after this story ends. What if losing everything was exactly what she needed to find herself? This is not a story about betrayal. This is a story about what grows in the space left behind. One-line lesson. The life you're afraid to lose might be the very thing keeping you from the life you were meant to live. If this already has your heart, you're going to want to hear every chapter. Hit like so this story finds someone who needs it. Drop a comment, "I'm staying," and subscribe, because this is just the beginning.
The coffee maker hummed. That was the first sound of that morning, low and steady, like everything was fine. Claire stood at the kitchen window, both hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched yet. Outside, the October light was doing that thing it does in New England, thin and golden, landing sideways on the maple trees, every leaf burning orange and red, beautiful and temporary. She was 8 months pregnant, her belly pressed gently against the edge of the counter. The baby had been quiet since 4 in the morning. That was normal, she told herself. The doctor said the baby would slow down near the end, save energy for the real work ahead. She told herself that, and she believed it. Mostly. The house was enormous. That was the only word for it. 11,000 square feet of marble and glass and carefully chosen silence. She had designed parts of it herself, back when she and Grant were first married. Back when choosing wallpaper together felt like the most intimate thing two people could do. That was 4 years ago. A different version of things. She picked up her phone, checked it, locked it, unlocked it, locked it again. Nothing. No messages. Grant had left before 6. He had been leaving early a lot lately. She had asked him once over dinner, casually. He said the Henderson project was behind schedule. He said his PR team was restructuring. He said she shouldn't worry. She had nodded, passed the bread, changed the subject. That was something she had learned to do. Change the subject, move around the discomfort the way you move around furniture in a dark room. You know it's there. You've memorized its shape. You just don't look at it directly. She set down her mug. The nursery was nearly finished. She had done most of it herself, which surprised people. Grant's wife, the billionaire's wife. Why would she do anything herself? But she had needed to. She had needed her hands in it. The soft gray walls. The white crib with the hand-carved spindles. The mobile she had assembled one night at 2 in the morning because she couldn't sleep and the baby was kicking, and something about building something felt necessary. She walked to the nursery now, stood in the doorway. It smelled like fresh paint and baby powder and something she couldn't name. Promise, maybe. Or maybe just wood and fabric, but it felt like promise. It smelled like the best thing she had done in years. "I'm going to get this right," she said quietly. To the room, to the baby, to herself. She put one hand on her belly. The baby shifted, slow and rolling, like something turning over in sleep. "There you are," she said. She smiled. That was the morning. Beautiful and real and exactly what it looked like, or so she believed. She went to get dressed, moving carefully through the house, one hand trailing the wall at corners out of habit. Mrs. Harding, the housekeeper, wouldn't arrive until 9. The whole house was hers and quiet. That quiet used to feel like peace. Lately it felt like something holding its breath. She told herself it was hormones. 3rd trimester, her doctor had said, emotions run high. You may feel anxious without reason. You may feel alone, even when you are not. She told herself that. She was in the bathroom when she heard his key in the front door. Grant was home. That was unusual. He had left before 6. It was not yet 7:30. She dried her hands and walked out, one hand at her lower back, the familiar ache she had carried for weeks. He was in the kitchen, jacket still on, standing at the island, pouring himself a coffee. He turned when he heard her. "Hey," he said, "you're back early. Forgot something." He gestured vaguely. His briefcase was on the counter. He didn't look directly at her. That was not unusual. Grant was not a man who looked directly at things that made him uncomfortable. She had thought once that it was a kind of reserve, the composure of a serious man. She understood now that it was something else. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Fine," she said. She paused. "A little tired? You should rest more." He said it the way you read from a script, the right words, the right delivery, the absence of anything real behind it. She watched him for a moment. He was handsome. He had always been handsome, dark hair just beginning to silver at the temples, sharp jaw, the kind of man women turn to look at in restaurants. She had been proud of that once, as though his appearance was something she had accomplished. "Grant, Are you all right?" He looked at her then, brief, assessing. "The way you look at a situation, not a person." "I'm fine," he said. "Just a lot going on." He picked up his briefcase. "Don't wait up tonight. It'll be late." She nodded. He was already walking to the door. "Grant?" He turned. "The baby shower," she said. "Your mother confirmed for Saturday." Something moved across his face, there and gone. "I know," he said. "I'll be there." And then he was gone. The coffee maker hummed. She stood in the kitchen alone, both hands wrapped around her mug again. The October light was still doing that thing with the maple trees, still beautiful, still temporary. She checked her phone. 3 times. Locked, unlocked, locked. Something is wrong, she thought, not in a spiral, not in a panic. Just a clear, steady thought, like reading a fact off a page. Something is wrong. She breathed in. She breathed out. She told herself to go to sleep. She did not go to sleep. Virginia Whitmore arrived at 11. She wore a cream wool coat and the lavender perfume she had worn every day for 40 years. Claire smelled it before the front door had fully opened. That particular scent that meant Grant's mother. That meant the formal love of a woman who expressed everything through presence rather than words. "You look wonderful," Virginia said. She stepped inside and set both hands on Claire's face. The unselfconscious intimacy of a woman who has known you long enough to take liberties. "I look enormous," Claire said. "You look like a woman doing the most extraordinary thing." Virginia removed her coat. "Is Grant here?" "He came home for a moment this morning. He's at the office." Something crossed Virginia's face, quick and controlled, the same expression Claire sometimes saw when Virginia was cataloging information she did not yet know what to do with. "Well," Virginia said, "it's just us, then." "Better." They had lunch at this kitchen table. Virginia had brought the food herself. Roasted chicken, herb bread, a lemon tart. She always brought food. Claire's own mother, Dorothy, brought food too. It was, Claire had come to believe, the language of women who love you and cannot say everything they feel. They bring roasted chicken instead. "The nursery is finished," Claire said. "Show me." She showed her. Virginia stood in the doorway the same way Claire had that morning, hands folded, eyes moving slowly around the room. "You did this yourself," Virginia said. Not a question. "Mostly." "It's beautiful." A pause. "You've always had that. The ability to make a space feel like it means something." Claire looked at her. "Virginia." Is everything all right? With Grant? Another one of those pauses, a Whitmore pause, long and deliberate. Grant is under a great deal of pressure, Virginia said carefully. The Henderson acquisition, the board, he takes things on and does not always put them down. I know, Claire said. But he loves you. Virginia said it the way you say a thing you are working to believe. He's just not always good at showing it. Claire nodded. She did not say, I know. She did not say, I'm starting to wonder. She said, thank you for coming. Virginia touched her arm on the way out, firm and brief, and full of something she didn't name. Claire stood in the doorway and watched the cream wool coat move down the front walk. The maple trees burned and burned in the October light. Everything looked exactly like it was supposed to. That night, Grant did not come home until after midnight. She heard him in the hallway. She lay still, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. She was not asleep. She had not been asleep for an hour. She listened to his footsteps stop at the bedroom door. A long pause, then moving away, toward the guest room. She lay in the dark with her hand on her belly. The baby was still. She breathed in, she breathed out. She did not go to sleep for a long time after that. It started with a receipt. She found it in the pocket of his gray blazer, the one she had taken to the dry cleaners on Tuesday because he asked her to. Mrs. Harding had called in sick that morning. Grant could not remember where the dry cleaner was, even though they had lived in this neighborhood for 3 years. She was not snooping. She was doing a favor. The receipt was from Maison Renard. She knew the name, knew it the way you know a restaurant you've heard about but never been to. A restaurant your husband has never suggested, never mentioned, has apparently visited without you. October 12th, a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks ago. She had been home that Tuesday evening. She remembered it clearly. She had been assembling the bookshelf for the nursery, the one that arrived in 47 pieces. She had eaten leftover pasta at 9 o'clock because Grant had texted to say the meeting ran long. The meeting. She stood in the kitchen with the receipt in her hand. 2 people, she thought. 2 glasses of wine at $40 apiece. The math was right there on the slip. Not a table for 4. Not a business dinner with a group. 2 people. A bottle of Sancerre. Steak for 1. Sea bass for 1. She set the receipt on the counter. She picked up her phone. She searched the restaurant. The first photograph that came up was the dining room. Candlelit, rose gold fixtures, curved leather banquettes made for leaning close. The first review said, romantic, intimate, exceptional for a proposal dinner or an anniversary. She set her phone face down on the counter. She stood there for a moment. She picked the receipt back up and looked at it again, as though the numbers might change. They did not change. He was at a business dinner, she thought. There are dozens of explanations. A colleague, a client, someone from the board. She folded the receipt in half. She put it in the pocket of her cardigan. She did not put it back in his blazer. His phone was on the nightstand when she woke at 3 that morning. She woke because the baby had started moving out again. Those late-night acrobatics that were both reassuring and exhausting. She lay on her left side, breathing through them. Grant was deeply asleep beside her. He had come home before 10. He had been unusually present at dinner, asking about the baby shower, asking how her back felt, filling her water glass without being asked. She had watched him across the table and felt something tighten in her chest, something that was not quite love and not quite dread, something sitting between them. His phone lit up at 3:17. She did not mean to look. She was already awake. The glow was right there. The screen lit for exactly 4 seconds before it dimmed, long enough to see the notification banner, amber. Tomorrow is fine. I'll bring the... Then dark. She lay very still. Amber. She knew the name, Grant's PR director. He had mentioned her in passing, the way you mention colleagues. She had attended the company Christmas party once. Claire remembered a woman, late 20s, sharp-featured, the kind of confidence that takes up space without apologizing. She had shaken Claire's hand and said, "Grant talks about you all the time," in a voice that was perfectly pleasant and somehow dismissive. As though mentioning Claire was a courtesy, Grant extended occasionally. A footnote. Claire had thought, at the time, "I don't like her," then told herself, "You're being unfair." She lay in the dark. Amber. "Tomorrow is fine. I'll bring the—" The message was unfinished, cut off. Her imagination was more than willing to complete it. She is a colleague, she thought. This is a work message. It is 3 in the morning, and a work colleague is texting about tomorrow's logistics. That is just someone who works too late. She breathed in. She breathed out. She put her hand on her belly. The baby moved one more time, slow and rolling, then settled. I am not crazy, she thought. I know what that message means. Then, no, I don't know anything. I have a receipt and a 4-second text preview. That is nothing. Then, why is she texting him at 3 in the morning? She did not fall back asleep. Wren came over on Friday. Wren Calloway, who had been her best friend since their sophomore year at university, who had been maid of honor at her wedding, who had held her hand through both miscarriages before this pregnancy, who had brought sparkling water for Claire and actual champagne for herself the night they confirmed the heartbeat at 8 weeks. Wren arrived with Korean barbecue and a new onesie that said "future troublemaker" and a slightly guilty expression. "What?" Claire said, the moment she saw her face. "Nothing," Wren said. "You look great. The nursery looks unbelievable. Eat first." They ate. Claire ate more than she expected. The baby apparently approved of Korean barbecue. They talked about Wren's new case, Dorothy's knee surgery, the baby shower on Saturday. Then Wren said carefully, "Have you met Grant's new PR director? The one who came in when James Kaufman left?" Claire looked at her. "I've heard her name," Claire said. Amber Cole." Wren turned a takeout container in her hands. She was at a charity gala last month, the Architecture Foundation. Was Grant there? He was. Wren set down the container. They arrived together, left together. She met Claire's eyes. It was probably work. "I just thought you should know." The room was very quiet. What was she like? Claire asked. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. "She talked about Grant a lot," Wren said. "Like the way you talk about someone who is yours, not my boss. Something else." Claire nodded. "How long have you suspected?" Wren asked. And there it was, the thing she had been carefully not naming. "I found a restaurant receipt a few days ago," Claire said. "And there was a text at 3 in the morning, and he's been—" She stopped. "He's been careful with me, like I'm something he's managing." Claire, "Don't." "I'm not going to tell you what to do," Wren said. Her voice was gentle. "I'm just going to say trust yourself. You know what you know." I'm not crazy, Claire thought. I know what I saw. "I'm 8 months pregnant," she said. "I know. I'm not going to fall apart. I have—" She put her hand on her belly. "I have something more important than falling apart." Wren reached across the table and took her hand. "What do you need?" she asked. Claire looked at the rain against the window, at the October dark settling over the garden. "I need to know," she said. "I need to actually know, before the baby comes." Wren nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Then we find out." She found the jewelry receipt 3 days later. Not snooping. She had been looking for the car insurance renewal form in the desk drawer in Grant's study. She pulled the drawer open and the receipt was right there, folded but not hidden, the way you leave something you have stopped being careful about. Cartier, $2,800. A bracelet, October 19th. She did not own a new bracelet. She opened her phone. She typed Amber Cole's name into a search. The account was private, but the profile photo showed a woman at a rooftop dinner, one arm raised slightly as though toasting, something gold and delicate on her wrist. She zoomed in. She would not be able to say for certain. She locked her phone. God, I was so stupid, she thought. All the signs were there. I just kept explaining them away because I needed them to be explainable. She sat down in Grant's chair, the leather cool and expensive beneath her. She took a breath. She did not cry. She thought, what now? And then, very clearly, now I get ready. She did not confront him. Not yet. She understood, with the slow clarity of a person who has finally decided to see clearly, that confronting him without everything was the same as confronting him with nothing. He would deflect. He would minimize. He would deploy his calm, logical voice and list alternative explanations until she sounded unreasonable for having asked at all. She had seen him do it in business disputes. She had watched him dismantle a contractor's complaint at a dinner party once so smoothly that by the end, the contractor was apologizing. She had admired it at the time. She did not admire it now, so she waited. She watched. She began paying attention in the precise, deliberate way that is almost worse than not knowing, because every small thing becomes evidence or absence of evidence, and the mind never rests. She noticed he showered immediately when he came home, not unusual for a man who went to the gym. But he had stopped going to the gym at the regular time. He was showering at irregular hours, as though washing something off. She noticed. He answered phone calls in the garage, not the study, not the bedroom, the garage, where the acoustics would swallow his voice. She noticed he did not reach for her in bed anymore, not even the unconscious, half-asleep reaching that had always been there, that she had taken for granted the way you take for granted water from a tap. She noticed all of this. She said nothing. She went to her prenatal appointment on Thursday. She drove herself because Grant had a meeting. The doctor said the baby was positioned well. Head down, healthy weight. A girl, the doctor confirmed again, though they had known for months. On the drive home, she pulled into a parking lot and sat for 12 minutes, doing nothing. I am having a girl, she thought, and my husband might be in love with someone else, and I am sitting in a parking lot in October while the leaves come off the trees, and I don't know what I'm going to do. She drove home. She made dinner. Wren had a contact at a private investigation firm. She was a family attorney. These things overlapped sometimes. She made a call, and her contact said Claire didn't need to hire anyone formally. There were things she could find herself if she knew where to look. She looked. She found on the corporate website a photograph from the company's quarterly town hall. Amber Cole stood 3 people from Grant, not touching, appropriate distance, but she was looking at him, and the way you look at someone when you think no one is watching, that was there. She found, on a business events website, a gala listing from 2 months ago. Grant Whitmore of Whitmore Developments. Noted as attending. No mention of a spouse. Amber Cole of Whitmore Developments. PR also attending. They had arrived at the same events. Left the same events. They existed in a shared professional world where Claire, the wife, had been made invisible. Erased from the frame as carefully as you erase a line from a drawing. She found a text from Grant sent to Amber from his laptop, which had been left open one morning. The text was short. Tonight worked. Don't worry. She stared at it for a long time. Tonight worked. A Tuesday in September. She had been at a fundraiser dinner alone because Grant had said he was flying to Chicago. He had not flown to Chicago. His secretary had confirmed he was in town all week when Claire asked about the calendar for something unrelated. She closed the laptop. She went to the nursery. She stood at the window. The maple tree in the backyard had almost completely let go. Branches bare and reaching, the fallen leaves lay in the wet grass like a message she already knew how to read. She pressed one hand flat against the cool glass. "I know," she said aloud, to herself, to the room. "I know exactly what this is." "I deserve better than this," she thought. "She deserves better than this." She put both hands on her belly and stood there for a long time, the glass cool against her palm. The bare branches outside, the leaves already gone. It was Wren who finally said what needed saying. Over the phone, the night before Claire's 33rd week appointment. "You have everything you need to have the conversation," Wren said. "You don't need a confession. You need to be heard." "He'll deny it," Claire said. "Probably. He'll try to make me feel like I'm overreacting." "He'll try," Wren said. "And you won't let him?" A pause. "I'm scared," Claire said. It was the first time she had said it out loud. "I know," Wren said. "Not of him, not of what he'll say. I'm scared of what comes after, when it's confirmed, when there's no more pretending," Wren said. "Yes." "Claire." Wren's voice was quiet and certain. "You already know. You have known for weeks. You are just waiting for permission to stop pretending, and I'm giving you that permission. You don't need his admission to know the truth." "I'm not crazy," Claire thought. "I know what I saw." "Okay," she said. "Okay," Wren said, as she made his favorite dinner on a Thursday. Braised short ribs, roasted fingerling potatoes, a bottle of red wine he had been saving since their first anniversary. She opened it, though she could not drink it, because something about opening it felt necessary, as though some rituals had to be honored even at the end of things. He came home at 7, which was early for him lately. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and took in the dinner and looked at her with an expression she could not name. "What's the occasion?" he said. "No occasion," she said. "Sit down." They ate. She watched him across the table and thought about all the dinners they had shared in this house. 4 years of dinners, learning each other across this table, his coffee habit, and his inability to parallel park, and the way he read every placard at every museum they visited, quietly, to himself, lips barely moving. She had loved that about him. She had loved so many small things. She had built a life on those small things. "Grant," she said. He looked up. "Are you having an affair with Amber Cole?" The silence was total. His face did not collapse. It did not flood with guilt. That would have been almost easier. Instead, it went very still, the way a surface goes still before it fractures. "Where's that coming from?" he said. Not a question, a tactic. "I found the restaurant receipt," she said. "The jewelry receipt. The text on your laptop. The gala where you attended without acknowledging that you have a wife. You went through my things. I found a receipt in a jacket I was taking to the dry cleaners." Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "Answer the question." He set down his fork. "Claire, yes or no, Grant?" His jaw tightened. "You're 8 months pregnant. You're emotional. This isn't the time. Yes or no?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then something shifted, the calculation. "It isn't what you think," he said. "Tell me what it is." "It's—" He stopped, started again. "It got complicated. It isn't serious. It's over." The wine in her glass caught the candlelight. "It's over," she said. "Yes." "When did it start?" she asked. He said nothing. "How long, Grant?" 8 months, he said finally. "Quiet. The way you confess something that has cost you very little to hold. 8 months. The same 8 months she had been growing his daughter. She held very still. He never loved me, she thought. He loved the idea of me, the wife, the function, the woman who decorated the nursery and chose the wallpaper and showed up at the right events. She breathed in, she breathed out. Okay, she said. Claire, I think you should sleep in the guest room tonight. He looked at her. Something moved in his face that she might once have called remorse. He stood, he picked up his plate, he left the room. She sat alone at the table. The anniversary wine, the braised short ribs, the sound of the house breathing around her. She did not cry. She put her hand on her belly. Outside, the last leaves let go. The next 72 hours were quiet in a way that was worse than any argument. Grant moved through the house with the careful consideration of a man who has been caught and is now performing remorse. He left her coffee on the counter in the morning. He asked once, through the closed nursery door, if she needed anything from the grocery store. She said no, thank you. She heard him go. She did not know what she felt. That was the strange part. She had expected devastation. The film version, where the walls come down and you shatter. But this was more like wading through cold water. Everything slowed, everything muffled. She moved through her days, answered emails, scheduled her appointment, ate meals, and carried inside herself this enormous, quiet fact. My husband has been sleeping with another woman for the entire length of this pregnancy. She said it to herself like that, directly, because she had learned that the way to not be destroyed by a truth is to look at it full on. You do not circle it. You do not soften it. You say, this is what is happening. And then you decide what to do next. She was deciding. The phone call came on a Saturday morning, not because she planned it, because Amber called. She had not known Amber had her number. She found out later that Amber had gotten it from Grant's phone months ago, had stored it, had held it like a card she would eventually play. She played it on a Saturday morning. Claire was in the kitchen. Grant was upstairs. The phone rang with an unknown number, and she answered out of habit. Claire. The voice was pleasant and measured. I think we should talk. She knew immediately. She felt it in her chest, a low tightening thing. Amber, she said. I'm not calling to be cruel, Amber said. I'm calling because I think you deserve the truth. The truth, Claire repeated. Grant and I have been together for 8 months. He's told you that. What he hasn't told you, a pause, precisely timed, is that he doesn't believe the baby is his. The kitchen was very still. The coffee maker had stopped humming. The house was holding its breath. The October trees outside the window, nearly bare now, stood perfectly motionless. That's a lie, Claire said. I'm not saying it to hurt you, Amber said. I'm saying it because he's been telling me this for months. He has doubts. He wants a paternity test. He's been afraid to ask you because, another pause, because of how you'd react. He's been afraid, Claire repeated. He doesn't want to raise another man's child. The phrase landed like something dropped from a height. Another man's child. As though Claire were someone who did those things. As though Claire had ever, not once, in 4 years of marriage, so much as... She breathed in. Thank you for calling, she said, because she could not find any other words that would not reveal too much. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen. She looked at her hands on the counter. Steady? Good? Fine. I'm not crazy, she thought. I know who I am. I know what is true and what is a lie planted by a woman who wants what I have. She went upstairs. Grant was in the bedroom, getting dressed. He looked up when she came in. Something in her face stopped him. Amber called me, she said. The color changed in his face, slightly, controlled. She said you've been doubting the baby's paternity. Claire? Is that true? He said nothing, which was its own answer. Grant, is that true? I just me apakshimpt. He turned away, his back to her, buttoning his shirt. There were things I noticed. You were late coming home from that conference in March. You mentioned someone. I mentioned a colleague, she said. Her voice had dropped very low. A colleague, Grant. James Harmon, 63 years old, married for 30 years. I showed you a group photo. You were there for that conversation. People, you have been sleeping with your PR director for 8 months, she said, while I have been carrying your daughter, and you have let her convince you, or convinced yourself, that the baby is not yours, so that you have a reason not to feel guilty. He turned around. His face was doing that calculative thing. I want a paternity test, he said. Fine, she said. We'll do a paternity test. After the baby is born. Fine. And until then, he looked at her. I think you should go. Stay with your mother until we know. She was so still. You want me to leave, she said. I think it would be better. For both of us. You want me to leave, she said again. I am 8 months pregnant, and you are telling me to leave. I'm not. I just think. Say what you mean, Grant. Her voice had gone somewhere else entirely. A register she had not known she had. Say it plainly. He looked at her for a long moment. Leave, he said. Take the. He gestured at her belly, his face unreadable. Just go. Leave with your belly. He did not say those exact words, but they were there, in the dismissal of her pregnancy to a gesture, in the reduction of his daughter, though he didn't know that yet, to an object, a complication, something to be managed or removed. She felt something happen in her chest, not breaking, the opposite. Something that had been soft went hard, quickly and permanently, the way water freezes. All right, she said. She turned and walked to the closet. She pulled out the overnight bag she had packed for the hospital and had been adding to for weeks. She added 2 more things, a photograph from the nightstand, the small white noise machine she had bought for the nursery. He stood in the doorway and watched her. Claire, I don't want to. You said what you said, she told him, and I heard you. She zipped the bag. I'll have a lawyer contact you about the house and the details. You don't need a lawyer. I'm not. She looked at him then, fully, the way she had not looked at him in weeks, because looking fully requires seeing clearly. My lawyer will contact yours, she said. She picked up the bag. She walked past him, down the stairs, through the kitchen. She stopped and looked at the coffee maker, humming on the counter, the familiar morning sound. I will not miss this, she thought. She was not sure it was true yet, but she thought it anyway. She walked out the front door. She drove to the parking garage of the grocery store 2 blocks away, because she needed to stop somewhere that wasn't moving. She turned off the engine. Outside, the sky was a flat, gray November white. The leaves were gone. Everything stripped back and bare. She sat in the parked car. She could not go in yet. She could not go anywhere yet. She turned the radio on, a country station. Someone singing about a house that used to be a home. She turned it off. She sat. She had her hands on the wheel even though the car was parked. She noticed that and released them. The rain came, soft and steady, ticking against the roof. Starting over feels impossible, she thought. But staying is worse. Staying would have been worse every single day. She sat in the parked car for 18 minutes. Then she started the engine. She drove to her mother's house. Dorothy opened the door before Claire had made it up the porch steps. She had probably been watching from the window. She did that. She had always done that. Standing just back from the curtain, when someone she loved was due to arrive. close enough to see them the moment they pulled in. She took one look at Claire, at the overnight bag, at her face. She didn't say anything. She opened the door wider and stepped aside. Claire walked in. The house smelled like the same things it had always smelled like: wood polish and vanilla soap and something from the kitchen. Always something from the kitchen. She stood in the entryway. Dorothy closed the door. "Mom," Claire said. Her mother put her arms around her. Both arms, careful of the belly, tight and steady. Claire stood in her mother's embrace and felt the hard thing in her chest stay hard. She did not break, but she let herself be held. "I know," Dorothy said. She didn't need the details yet. She never needed the details first. "I know, sweetheart. I know." She slept for 10 hours the first night. This surprised her. She had expected to lie awake in her childhood bedroom, the same room she had slept in from age 3 to age 18, now a guest room with different curtains and the same slightly creaky floorboard just inside the door. She had expected to stare at the ceiling, cataloging everything she had lost. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately. The deep, blunt sleep of a person who has been running for a very long time and has finally stopped. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Dorothy moving through the kitchen below. She lay on her side and felt the baby shift, low and heavy, like a planet turning slowly on its axis. "Good morning," she said quietly, to the baby, to the day. Dorothy did not ask a lot of questions in the first week. This was a kind of grace. She made breakfast. She found extra towels. She fixed the bathroom faucet that had been dripping since summer. She was, Claire understood, doing what women do when they love someone and cannot fix the actual thing. She fixed everything adjacent to it. She fixed the faucet and the loose hinge on the back door and the timer on the porch light. She fixed what could be fixed. Harold Price called on the third day. He was a family attorney she had known peripherally for years. Wren had suggested she call him. She had called from the parked car, actually, on the way to Dorothy's. She hadn't remembered doing it until he called back. "Tell me what you know so far," he said. She told him. The secret affair confirmed. His request that she leave. The house, in both their names. The baby, due in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, he said. Yes. All right, first things first. We ensure your financial stability before the birth. The house is yours as much as his. He cannot legally compel you to leave. What happened is that you left voluntarily, which we note in our records. Second, if he wants a paternity test, we facilitate that on a timeline that works for you, not him. "I want it documented," she said. "Whatever the test shows, I want it on record." "We'll make sure of that." A pause. "Are you in a safe place?" "Yes," she said. "My mother's house." "Good. Stay there. Don't return to the house without letting me know. I'll file for temporary support by end of week." She hung up and looked at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom. Starting over feels impossible, she thought, but staying was worse. She said it to herself like a truth she was working to memorize, like something she would need to know by heart later. Grant texted twice in the first week. Professional, brief. The tone of a man handling a logistical problem. "Let me know when you've spoken to an attorney. We should arrange the test, and then..." "The nursery furniture. Do you want me to have it moved to your mother's?" She did not respond. She lay awake some nights doing the Google searches. She could not have explained to anyone. "My husband chose someone else while I was pregnant. Paternity doubt during marriage. Can he legally require me to leave? How to rebuild after leaving a marriage at 8 months pregnant." The screen bright in the dark, 3 in the morning. Just her and her phone, and the particular loneliness of a person who has been lied to so thoroughly that she is no longer sure which of her memories are real. Somewhere along the way, she thought, I became invisible, and I let it happen because it was easier than seeing clearly. She breathed in. She breathed out. That is over, she thought. I am not invisible to myself. She went into labor at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. The first contraction woke her from sleep. She lay still for a moment, unsure, then felt the second one and understood completely. She got up and went to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror, hair sleep-tangled, her largest maternity shirt, soft gray, a pair of socks that didn't match. Okay, she said to her reflection. Okay. She went to Dorothy's door. Mom? A rustling, a light. Dorothy came to the door in her bathrobe and took one look at Claire's face. How far apart? She asked. 7 minutes. All right, Dorothy was already moving. Let me get my keys. The car wouldn't start. The battery, which Dorothy had meant to replace for 2 months, which had been on the same to-do list as the dripping faucet, chose this night. The engine turned over once, weakly, then nothing. Dorothy stood in the cold garage and said a word Claire had never heard her mother say. Call Grant, Dorothy said. No. Claire? Not Grant. A contraction came. She breathed through it. 7 breaths. In through the nose. Counted. Out. Who then? Dorothy said. She thought of the list of people she could call at midnight. It was shorter than it should have been. Mr. Bellows, she said. Raymond Bellows. Retired firefighter. Age 71. He lived next door. He had mentioned at the block association meeting that he never slept more than 4 hours. He had given Dorothy his number after the ice storm last February. In case of emergency, he had said. He had meant it. Dorothy called. He was at the door in 4 minutes. Winter coat over his pajamas. Car keys already in his hand. Let's go, he said. Not a single question. Not a pause, not a what happened, or a should I call someone. Just let's go. He drove through a snow squall, steady and calm, the way a retired firefighter drives, unhurried but certain. Dorothy sat in the back with Claire and held her hand through each contraction, counting with her. At one point, Claire looked up and saw the snow coming down in the headlights and thought, irrationally, it's beautiful. The whole world was white and still, and the headlights cut through it, and her daughter was coming. They made it to the hospital in 22 minutes. Grant was not there. She had tried to call him once, in the car. Some ancient instinct, some version of herself she was still in the middle of leaving behind. It went to voicemail. She did not leave a message. She did not need him there. She learned this. Over the next 11 hours, she learned this absolutely. Dorothy held her left hand. The labor nurse, a woman named Jackie, who had seen everything twice and had the particular steadiness that comes from that, held her right at 3 a.m, when the pain had reached a place that was beyond pain and had become something more like weather, something you exist inside, not something done to you. She heard a voice in her own head, very clear and calm. You are stronger than you knew. She said it out loud. I am stronger than I knew. Jackie said, without looking up from the monitor, Yes, you are. And something in the way she said it, without drama, without ceremony, like a simple fact she had known for hours, that landed somewhere deep in Claire's chest and stayed there. Nora was born at 10:17 in the morning. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. The darkest gray eyes that would shift in the months to come to a green-gray that Claire would recognize one day in a photograph in an old album. Grant's grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, the same extraordinary eyes. The kind that don't appear in every generation. But that was later. In the moment, a cry, high and clear and furious. The cry of someone newly arrived and already opinionated about it. The nurse laid her on Claire's chest, and something happened. She could not describe it adequately. She had heard people try. Every mother she had ever known, every book, every conversation. None of it had prepared her for the actual experience of this, the weight of this specific, particular person on her chest, the heat of her, the smell, the small fist that closed on air and then on Claire's hospital gown. She thought, oh, just that, the whole story in a single syllable. Oh. Hi, she said to her daughter. Her voice was wrecked with exhaustion, and it was the most honest thing she had ever said. Hi, I'm your mom. I'm so glad you're here. Nora blinked at her. Claire laughed, wet and broken, and full of something she had no name for. Something that had no name because it was too big and too specific and too entirely new. Dorothy, in the corner of the room, pressed her face into her hands. Mr. Bellows, who had waited in the hall for 7 hours with a bag of vending machine sandwiches, knocked softly on the door. Dorothy opened it. He looked in. His old firefighter's face went completely soft. She's beautiful, he said. To the room, to all of them. She was worth everything, Claire thought. Every single thing. She named her Nora, after Dorothy's mother, Eleanor, who had died when Claire was 12, and who had smelled like talcum powder and roses and had read aloud to Claire every time she visited, even when Claire was old enough to read herself, because some things are worth doing even when they're not strictly necessary. Nora Dorothy Ashford. Not Whitmore, anything, just hers. The first year was the hardest. Not because of one enormous thing, because of the 10,000 small things. The night feedings, alone, in the dark, with only the white noise machine and the sound of Nora breathing. The first time Nora was sick. A fever at 3 months, just a mild one, the kind the pediatrician called completely normal. And Claire sat in the rocker in Dorothy's spare room at 2 a.m. with her daughter, burning gently against her chest, and thought, for the first time with real sharpness, she should have a father. Not Grant. She was past wanting Grant for herself, but Nora should have a father who wanted her. A father who had not required a laboratory to tell him she was real. She cried that night, quietly, so as not to wake Dorothy. Long, thorough tears, the kind you need to get through. And then she put them away and kept going. She kept going. Harold had filed the divorce papers. Grant's lawyers responded. The negotiations were what Harold called predictably contentious and Claire called exhausting and clarifying, because watching someone reveal himself fully through the choices he makes in divorce proceedings is illuminating in a way no other experience quite matches. He denied financial responsibility for Nora because he still disputed paternity. He requested an expedited postnatal test. Harold advised her to agree, which she did. She had never had any doubt whatsoever about what that test would show. And the sooner it was documented, the better. The test was done when Nora was 6 weeks old. The results came back 8 days later. Nora was Grant's daughter. Probability 99.997%. Harold called her with the results. She sat on the edge of Dorothy's sofa and listened. She thanked him. She hung up. She looked at Nora, asleep in the bassinet beside her. I know, she said softly. I always knew. Grant's legal team went quiet for 2 weeks after the results came in. Then they came back with a new position. He wanted visitation. She wanted child support. They spent 6 months negotiating a framework that Harold described as adequate, and Claire described as the minimum she was willing to accept. She had learned, in those negotiations, to ask for what she needed rather than what she thought she could get. These were different things. Very different things. Grant paid. The transfers came on the 1st of every month. Punctual and cold. No feeling in it. No acknowledgement. Money moving through systems until it landed in her account. He had not asked to see Nora yet. She had not offered. She moved out of Dorothy's house by the time Nora was 7 months old. Not because Dorothy wanted her to leave. Dorothy would have kept them forever if she could have. But Claire had decided it was time. She had waited until she was ready and then moved while she was ready. She found a two-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she had always liked but never lived in. A converted Victorian with high ceilings and deep windowsills, where Nora, once she was pulling herself up to standing, liked to watch the street below. She would stand at the windowsill for long minutes, both hands flat on the glass, watching the world with the same focused attention she brought to everything. She painted the apartment herself. Wren helped with the hard-to-reach corners. Dorothy assembled the bookshelf, the same kind, arriving in 47 pieces. They made a family joke of it. The bookshelf that travels with us. Dorothy assembling it piece by piece and refusing to consult the instructions on the grounds that the instructions had been wrong about the left panel last time. She found a daycare within walking distance, a pediatrician she liked, a coffee shop 3 blocks away where the staff learned her name within the first month. That was the thing about belonging somewhere by choice. It settles faster. It holds better. She had a life, small at first, a life of small things, but real in a way that the mansion with the marble floors had never quite been. The consultancy came out of necessity and became a vocation. She had always worked in interior design, even while married to Grant. Her own clients, her own projects, though she had kept it smaller than she might have otherwise. She hadn't wanted to be accused of trading on his name. Now she had nothing to trade on but herself. She was surprised to find that this was enough, more than enough. She reached out to former clients. She built a small website. Wren made introductions. Word moved the way it does in that world. Recommendation passed like something valuable, something worth sharing. One person told 2 people, who told 3 more. Within 8 months, she had 6 ongoing clients and a waiting list. One was a small architecture firm that had just won a contract for a boutique hotel renovation downtown. The principal architect's name was Fletcher Dowd. He was tall, quiet, thorough in his questions. He brought coffee to the first site meeting, which he handed to her before saying a single word. And she thought, he is either exceptionally considerate or he knows something about mornings with a baby. It was both, she later learned. He had a daughter too, 4 years old, from a marriage that had ended without drama and with genuine mutual respect. Claire found this almost implausibly adult. She did not fall for him immediately. She wasn't ready to fall for anyone. She told him this directly when he asked her to dinner 4 months into the project. Okay, he said. Coffee then. I have a baby, she said. I know, he said. She comes to site visits. She chewed on your blueprint once. The second version was better. He looked at her. Just coffee. We're allowed to just have coffee. She almost smiled. Once, she said. Once, he agreed. It was once. And then it was several times. And then it was something she was careful about, and uncertain of, and quietly, cautiously glad of. Something she approached the way you approach a bridge you're not sure about, testing each board before you put your full weight on it. She worked late one October night, 2 years after leaving the house on Maple Ridge Drive. Nora was asleep. Dorothy had come to stay. Claire sat at her kitchen table with her portfolio open, organizing her project files, noting what had worked and what hadn't, and what she wanted to do differently. It was 2 in the morning. She was reorganizing her entire design portfolio at 2 in the morning. She noticed this. She thought, I always do this when I'm processing something. She thought about what she was processing. She thought, I am good at this. I am genuinely, actually good at this. Not because Grant was gone, not in spite of anything. Just, I built this. This is mine. I made this from nothing, and it is real, and it is growing, and it belongs entirely to me. She closed the portfolio. She went to Nora's room, stood in the doorway the way she had stood in the nursery doorway in the mansion. Same gesture, different world. Nora was asleep with both arms flung up, the way she slept, surrendered and fearless, trusting the world to hold still while she rested. "I'm figuring it out," she told her daughter. Quietly, "We're figuring it out." Nora Ashford, at 3 years old, was many things. Curious in the precise, relentless way of children who have been talked to as though their questions matter. Funny in the way of someone who has spent a great deal of time around adults and has learned to make them laugh. The perfectly timed observation. The question that reveals she has been listening to conversations no one thought she was listening to. Stubborn. This, Claire acknowledged, with something like pride, may have come from her, in the way that is sometimes exhausting and mostly reassuring. A child who knows her own mind will know her own mind forever. Claire had come to believe that stubbornness in a small girl is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a muscle to be strengthened. She was also, indisputably, a Whitmore in her face. Claire noticed it incrementally. The jaw, the brow, the particular way she tilted her head when she was thinking. And those eyes, the gray-green that had clarified by her first birthday, unlike Claire's warm brown and unlike Dorothy's deep blue. Unmistakably, the Whitmore gray-green that appeared in family photographs going back 2 generations. The kind of eyes that announce exactly where you come from. She said nothing about this to anyone. It was not her job to broadcast. Virginia Whitmore came into their lives the way significant things sometimes do. Sideways, quietly, without announcement. It was a Saturday. The farmer's market, 3 blocks from Claire's apartment, the one she went to every week because Nora liked the honey vendor, and the honey vendor liked Nora, and this had become their weekend ritual. In the way that routines become sacred when you are building a life from scratch. When every repeated thing is a thread you are weaving on purpose. She was paying for a jar of raw clover honey when she felt someone stop behind her. She turned. Virginia Whitmore stood at the edge of the honey table in a winter coat the color of cream. She was looking at Nora, who had taken the honey jar from Claire and was studying the beeswax seal on the lid with intense scientific focus. Virginia's face. Claire had known Virginia Whitmore for 5 years. She had studied that face in good times and complicated times and Christmas dinners and the silent diplomacy of family events. She knew all the expressions in Virginia's vocabulary. She had never seen this one. It was recognition, raw and involuntary, the kind that bypasses composure entirely, that arrives before you can prepare for it. She was looking at Nora's eyes. Claire said nothing. Virginia lifted her eyes to Claire's. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Hello, Claire," Virginia said. "Virginia." Nora looked up from the honey jar. She looked at Virginia with the frank, assessing gaze of a child who has not yet learned to pretend not to stare. She took her time. "Hi," Nora said. "I'm Nora." Virginia crouched, carefully, in her good coat, to Nora's eye level. "Hello, Nora," she said. Her voice had something in it that Claire could not name and did not need to. "I like honey," Nora informed her. "I know just how you feel," Virginia said. She texted Claire that evening. "May I see you both again? I would like that, if you're willing. V." Claire sat with the text for a long time. Dorothy looked over her shoulder, read it, and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "I need to think about it," Claire typed back. "Of course," Virginia replied. "Take all the time you need." She thought about it for 3 days. She thought about what Nora deserved. She thought about what she herself was willing to give and what she was not. She thought about the difference between keeping a door closed for her own protection and keeping a door closed to punish someone through a child. She had made a decision early on that she would not use Nora as a weapon. This was not easy. It was a choice she had to remake regularly, quietly, without acknowledgement from anyone, but she had made it, and she held to it. "I'm willing to meet for coffee," she texted Virginia. "Once. Nora will be there. This is not about Grant." "Understood," Virginia replied. "Thank you." They met on a Tuesday morning at the coffee shop 3 blocks from Claire's apartment. Virginia arrived first, which surprised Claire. She had ordered a pot of tea and a small plate of shortbread for Nora, which surprised her more. Nora ate the shortbread and told Virginia about her daycare's class pet, a hamster named Detective, at considerable length and with impressive narrative detail. Virginia listened with her full attention, the kind of attention that cannot be performed, that either exists or doesn't. When Nora climbed down from her chair and went to look at the pastry case, Virginia looked at Claire. "She has Margaret's eyes," Virginia said. "Grant's grandmother." "I know," Claire said. Virginia wrapped both hands around her tea. "Grant doesn't know we're meeting. Does Grant know about any of this?" "No." A pause. "He's been going through things. Amber left 8 months after you did. The Henderson project collapsed. There have been consequences to his choices." Claire said nothing. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for him," Virginia said. "I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know that reality has a way of arriving eventually. It doesn't always knock. Sometimes it just lets itself in." "It does," Claire said. Virginia looked at Nora, at the pastry case, advertiser-friendly. "She's extraordinary," she said. "She is," Claire said. This she did not need to qualify. After the first coffee, there was a second, a third. Virginia and Nora built, in their sideways way, a relationship that existed outside Grant's knowledge and inside Claire's careful monitoring. Virginia came to the farmer's market occasionally. She sent books, good ones, the ones she had read to Grant as a child. She was not trying to insert herself. She was not trying to build a claim. She was just present in the way of someone who has realized they have something to lose and has decided not to lose it by staying away. Claire watched this and felt complicated things about it. She spoke to Harold about the legal dimensions. He advised documentation. She documented. She spoke to Wren about the emotional dimensions. "How do you feel about it?" Wren asked. "I feel like Nora deserves people who love her," Claire said. "And Virginia loves her, or she's trying to, and I was never angry at Virginia." "And what about Grant?" She was quiet. "Grant is a different question," she said. "Does Virginia know you know she's going to tell him eventually?" "Yes," Claire said. "And I've made it clear that when and if that happens, any involvement with Nora is on terms I set. Not his. Not Virginia's. Mine." "Good," Wren said. "I'm not angry anymore," Claire said. "I want that to be clear, not to him. I don't need him to know what I am or am not, but for me. I'm not angry anymore. It's too expensive, and I have more interesting things to spend on." Fletcher had taken them, her and Nora, to a fall fair 2 weekends ago. Nora had ridden a pony named Sunday and screamed with delight, and Fletcher had laughed the way you laugh when something good surprises you. She had thought, this is what I'm spending on. I deserve this, she had thought. I built my way here and I deserve to be here. 3.5 years. Time had moved the way it does in a life that is genuinely being lived. Not slowly, not quickly, but in that particular rhythm of real days where mornings are real and evenings are real, and the moments compound into something solid, something that cannot be taken away because it is not dependent on anyone else's approval. The consultancy had grown. She had hired an assistant, a recent design school graduate named Lily, who was meticulous and funny and made Claire feel, for the first time, like the person running a thing rather than the thing being run. She had moved to a larger space. Still the Victorian neighborhood she loved, but a proper studio now. Natural light, a drafting table, a wall where she pinned work in progress and could see, at a glance, the shape of everything she was building. She had reinvented herself, not out of ambition, but out of necessity. And then the necessity had become pride. Fletcher had become, in the quiet way of things that become real before you announce them, a part of her life. Not her whole life, she was particular about this. She had spent years being someone's wife, which had come to mean being the supporting architecture of someone else's primary structure. She would not do that again. Fletcher seemed, genuinely, to understand this. He had a practice of his own, a daughter of his own, a life that existed fully independently of her. What they were building was an addition, not a replacement. She liked this. She was learning to trust it, learning that trust is not given but accumulated, one kept promise at a time. Nora, at 3.5, adored him. This should have been born, this should have made things simpler. In some ways it did. In other ways it made Claire more careful, because Nora's adoration was not something she was willing to offer carelessly. Nora did not have a father in her daily life. The last thing she needed was a figure who arrived and then departed, who was present and then not. "I'm not going anywhere," Fletcher had said to her once, quietly on her porch after Nora was in bed. The neighborhood was quiet. The porch light was on. She could hear a dog somewhere down the street. "You don't know that yet," she said. "I know more than you might think," he said. "I'm not asking you to believe it yet. I'm just asking you to let it be possible." She had looked at him in the porch light, patient and serious, and here. "Okay," she had said. "It's possible." And that had been enough. For then. Enough for that night. She almost didn't hear the voicemail. It came in while she was at a client meeting. She noticed it that evening while Nora ate dinner. Virginia's name, and a message longer than Virginia usually left. She stepped into the hallway. "Claire, it's Virginia. I've done something. I need you to know about it before anything else happens. I arranged a DNA test. I had a sample from Nora, from the daycare health form. She had a routine blood panel, and I had it compared to Grant's sample from a medical file. The results are what you and I both know they are. She is his, 100%. A pause. Virginia's voice, careful and controlled, and underneath that, shaking slightly. "I showed him the results this morning. I thought you should know because he will call you. And I thought you should have time to decide what you want to say." Claire stood in the hallway. She could hear Nora in the kitchen telling herself a story while she ate. The way she did. A running narrative about whatever was happening in her imagination. The voice rising and falling with plot developments. A character named Detective the Hamster apparently navigating a complex situation involving a wheel and a disputed piece of carrot. She listened to that voice. She thought about Grant, who had just had 4 years of his assumptions collapse into a laboratory result. She felt many things. She cataloged them as they came. Something that was not quite satisfaction. Something that was not quite grief. Something that was... She searched for the word vindication. The quiet, complete vindication of a person who has known the truth all along and waited patiently for it to become visible to everyone else. The truth had done its own work. She had not needed to argue for it. She did not call him. She decided she would not call him. If he wanted to speak to her, he could call. And if he called, she would decide what to say on her own terms in her own time. She went back to the kitchen. "Nora," she said, "eat your peas." "They're terrible," Nora said. "They are objectively fine." "They are not fine, Mama." She sat down across from her daughter. Her extraordinary, specific, not a single Whitmore-named daughter, who argued about peas with the moral conviction of someone twice her age. She thought, I will handle whatever comes next. She thought, we will be fine. She had said that to herself many times over 4 years. The difference was that now she knew it was true. Rin came over that night. Not because Claire called her, because Rin had some mechanism developed over 20 years of friendship for knowing when she was needed. She arrived at the door with bonbon and sparkling water and a look that said she had been told or had guessed. Virginia called me too, Rin said, to warn you. She's very methodical, that woman. She is. How do you feel? Claire thought about this. I feel like someone finally said out loud what I've known for 3.5 years, she said. And I feel... She looked at her hands. I feel tired in a way that isn't bad. Like you're tired after finishing something. Are you finished? With that part of it, she said. Yes. What about Nora? Nora has a father who doesn't know her. Whether that father becomes a real presence in her life is something we will navigate very, very carefully, with legal documentation and my full attention, and his complete compliance with a framework I set. And if he doesn't comply? She looked at Rin. Then he doesn't get to be her father, she said. That's not a threat, it's just the terms. Rin raised her glass. To the terms. Claire raised her water. To the terms, she said. I'm not crazy, she thought. I have never been crazy. I have been right, all along, about all of it. He called the next morning. She was dropping Nora at daycare. She felt the phone buzz in her pocket, pulled it out on the sidewalk outside the daycare, and saw his name. She stood there for a moment. She thought about the morning, 4 years ago, when she had stood in the kitchen with the coffee maker humming and checked her phone 3 times. Locked, unlocked, locked. Waiting for something she was afraid of knowing. She was not afraid now. She pressed answer. Claire? His voice was different. She had expected different, but not this different. The calculation was gone from it. What remained was something she hadn't heard from him in years. Something exposed, like a room with all the furniture removed and nothing to hide behind. Grant, she said. A long pause. I didn't know, he said. I want to. I need you to know that I know what you didn't know, she said. And I know that you chose not to find out. For 4 years. Silence. I was wrong, he said. I was completely... I don't have words for how wrong I was. She stood on the sidewalk. The morning was clear and cold and bright. The November light was thin and honest, the kind of light that shows everything exactly as it is. I know, she said. I want to see her. She was quiet for a long moment. That's a conversation with my lawyer first, she said. And then if the terms are acceptable, it's a very slow, very careful introduction, with a lot of documentation. And it's on her timeline, not yours. Yes, he said. Immediately. No negotiation, no deflection, no calculation. She noticed that, filed it. I'll have Harold contact you, she said. Claire, Grant? Her voice was not cold. It was something more precise than cold. It was simply clear, the clarity of a person who has done the work and arrived at the other side. I'm not angry at you anymore. I want you to know that. I'm not doing any of this from anger. I'm doing it from the place you pushed me to 4 years ago when you told me to leave. I built something in that place, and I'm protecting it. He said nothing. I'll have Harold call you, she said again. She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, phone in her hand, the November light landing on everything. The hardest part, she thought, was admitting I knew all along. Not the hard part, the freeing part, the part that let me go. She put her phone in her pocket. She walked toward the studio. The legal framework took 8 weeks. Harold was thorough. Grant's attorneys were cooperative. She suspected this was less a function of their professionalism and more a function of Grant's instructions, which seemed to have shifted from adversarial to accommodating with the abruptness of a man whose entire internal narrative has just been revised. Virginia called twice during those 8 weeks, once to apologize for having arranged the test without asking. Claire told her she understood and that she wasn't angry, which was true. The second time to update her on Grant's state of mind, which Claire did not ask for, but listened to anyway, because knowing the terrain was its own kind of preparation. "He hasn't been well," Virginia said carefully. "I'm sorry to hear that," Claire said. This was also true. "Amber leaving broke something in him," Virginia said. "I think he understood, when she left, that he had destroyed what he had for—" She stopped. "For nothing that was real." "That's his to carry," Claire said. "Not cruelly, just accurately, the way you state a fact." "Yes," Virginia said. "Yes, it is." The first meeting was on a Saturday afternoon in February. She chose the location, the coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment, her territory, her terms. She told Nora the night before, in simple and honest words. "There is someone who would like to meet you. His name is Grant. He is your father." She used the word father because she believed children deserved the precision of true words. She did not say daddy. Daddy was earned. Nora had processed this the way she processed most information, with a brief pause and a direct question. "Where has he been?" she asked. "He had some things to figure out," Claire said. Nora considered this. "Did he figure them out?" "He's trying." Nora seemed to accept this. She was, Claire had always believed, an exceptionally reasonable person. More reasonable, in many ways, than most adults she knew. Grant arrived at the coffee shop first. She saw him through the window as she and Nora walked up the street. He was sitting at a table, hands around a coffee cup, watching the door. He looked different. Something about his shoulders. Something about the deliberate stillness of a person who is working very hard to be calm. Who is sitting in his own body the way you sit in a waiting room. He saw them through the glass. She watched his face when he saw Nora. She did not have words for what happened in his face when he saw Nora. It was the face of a person understanding, completely and irreversibly, the size of what he had not done. 4 years of not doing. The full weight of that landing on him in a single moment through the plate glass window of a coffee shop on a February morning. She had not expected to feel anything watching this. She felt something. Not pity exactly, not satisfaction exactly, something more complicated, something that acknowledged he is a person who made catastrophic mistakes and now lives with them, and something that added, quietly, and I built a life that is not defined by his mistakes. They went in. Nora, who was never shy, walked directly to the table and climbed up into the chair across from him and looked at him with her grandmother Margaret's gray-green eyes. She took her time looking. She was thorough. "Hi," she said. "I'm Nora." Grant looked at her for a moment. "Hi, Nora," he said. His voice was steady. "I'm Grant." "I know," Nora said. "Do you like honey?" He blinked. Yes, I do actually." "Good," Nora said. "We can get some at the market." Claire sat down. She did not fill the space between them with words. She let the moment be what it was. Some moments require filling. This one required witness. After coffee, after Nora had told him about Detective the Hamster and the pony named Sunday, and Detective the Hamster again after she had climbed down from her chair and gone to look at the pastry case with the focused intensity of someone making an important decision, Grant looked at Claire. He opened his mouth. She held up one hand, gently, not stopping him, just asking for a moment. She looked at her daughter through the pastry case glass, weighing the merits of almond versus lemon, her face very serious. She thought about standing at the kitchen window on an October morning 4 years ago, both hands around a coffee mug. The maple trees, burning gold and temporary outside, checking her phone 3 times, the coffee maker humming. She thought about the parking garage in the November rain, about Dorothy's arms, about Nora's first cry, that small, furious sound that changed everything, about 2 in the morning and 47 pieces of bookshelf, and the portfolio she reorganized, and the studio with natural light, and Fletcher laughing at a fall fair, and Nora on a pony named Sunday, screaming with pure joy. She thought, "Look at what I built." She turned back to Grant. "You're going to want to apologize," she said, "and I want you to know I've already accepted it. Not for your sake, for mine. I accepted it a long time ago because carrying that weight was too expensive." He looked at her. His eyes were wet. She noted this without cruelty. "I don't deserve—" "I'm not offering you absolution," she said. "I'm offering you the chance to be Nora's father. That's a different thing. It's a chance you didn't take 4 years ago, and I'm giving it to you now because she deserves it, not because you've earned it." He nodded. He didn't trust his voice. "You'll show up," she said, consistently. "On the schedule, we agreed with Harold. You'll be patient. You'll let her set the pace. And you will never, for as long as either of us is alive, make her feel like she is a question that needs to be answered." "Yes," he said. "Are we clear?" "Yes." She nodded. Nora came back from the pastry case with a decision. "Lemon," she announced, "because lemon is for brave people." Grant almost smiled. The first real thing she had seen from him in years. Not performed, not calculated, just a man surprised by a child, which is one of the most honest things a face can do. "I'll take lemon too," he said. Nora considered him. "Okay," she decided. "You can have lemon." Fletcher asked her to marry him in April, not down on one knee with a ring. That wasn't his style, and it wasn't hers. He asked her the way real questions are asked between people who have been honest with each other, directly, over coffee, on a Sunday morning when Nora was at Dorothy's, with his hands around his mug and a directness in his eyes. She had come to count on the way you count on a good structure, the kind built to hold weight. "I would like to build something permanent with you," he said, "if that's something you're open to." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the woman she had been at 28, sitting in her mother's kitchen, the woman who had just walked out of a house and a marriage, and everything she thought was her life. That woman had been shattered and careful and had needed a long time and a great deal of quiet courage to put herself back together, piece by piece, the way you assemble something in 47 parts. She was not that woman anymore. She was not that woman. She carried her. She understood her. She had been shaped by everything that woman had gone through. But she was not fragile in the same places. She had built differently. She had learned where she was strong. "Give me a week to think about it," she said. He nodded, not disappointed, not pressuring. "Take 2," he said. She thought for 4 days. She called Dorothy. She called Wren. She sat at her drafting table late at night with a cup of tea and her portfolio and the sound of Nora asleep in the next room. That small breathing sound that had become the steadiest sound in her life. She thought, starting over 3.5 years ago felt impossible. And I did it anyway. And it turned out to be the making of me. She thought, this is not starting over. This is moving forward from solid ground. She said yes on the 4th day. Fletcher came over for dinner. She told him over pasta because it seemed right, ordinary and real and without ceremony. Because she had had ceremony before and understood now that what matters is the actual thing underneath it. The thing that is true when the occasion is over and the guests have gone home. He reached across the table and took her hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Nora, who had been listening with the focused attention of a child who understands that something significant is happening, looked between them. "Are you going to live here now?" she asked Fletcher. "If that's okay with you," he said. Nora considered this at considerable length. She gave it the same seriousness she gave the lemon versus almond question, the same deliberate attention she gave to everything that mattered. "You have to let me use the good pencils," she said. "Done," he said. "And you have to do the voices when you read to me." "Absolutely. Different voices. Not the same voice." Obviously, Nora made her decision face. The face she made when she was choosing between lemon and almond, between yes and no, between the good pencils and the regular pencils. The face of someone who takes their own judgments seriously. "Okay," she said. "You can live here." Grant came to Nora's 4th birthday. This was not by accident. It was the result of 8 months of careful negotiation, 2 meetings with a child therapist who had helped Claire prepare Nora, 3 supervised visits, and 1 unsupervised visit to the park that Harold described as without incident, which was the most reassuring phrase he knew. He brought a gift, which he had cleared with Claire in advance, a picture book about birds, because Nora had recently announced she was very interested in birds. Virginia had told him, and he had paid attention. Claire noticed that he had paid attention. He sat at the edge of the birthday gathering, small, family, and close friends, Nora's daycare friends, and their parents. He watched his daughter move through the room. She was magnetic in the way of children, who have been loved absolutely, loud when she had something to say, quiet when she was thinking, generous with her hugs, and fierce about her lemon cake. Dorothy sat near him for part of the afternoon. Claire had not orchestrated this. Dorothy had decided it herself, with the practical wisdom of a woman who understands that people are not only their worst decisions, that they are also what they do after the worst decisions, and that a child's birthday party is not a place for old scores. Dorothy didn't say much to him. She passed him cake when it was cut. She watched Nora open presents. At one point, Dorothy said, "She's going to be something." He looked at Nora. "I know," he said. "I know she is." "That's on her mother," Dorothy said. Not cruelly, just clearly. "The way you state a fact." "Yes," he said. "It is." He said it the way someone says something they have been thinking for a long time, something that had been true for years before he was willing to say it out loud. Claire stood at the kitchen window of her apartment, the window where Nora liked to stand, and watch the street below, both hands flat on the glass, watching the world. She looked out at the April afternoon. The maple trees were doing that spring thing, the new leaves coming in small and bright and very green. Nothing like October. Not burning, not bare. New. The particular green of things just beginning, before anything has had a chance to go wrong yet. Wren appeared at her shoulder with 2 glasses of wine. "I'm not drinking," Claire said. "You haven't had any in a while." Wren paused. Claire will say, "I found out Tuesday," she said. "I haven't told anyone yet." Wren was quiet for a moment. She stood very still beside her. "Does Fletcher know?" she asked. "I'm telling him tonight." Another pause. A Wren pause, warm and careful. "How do you feel?" she asked. She looked out the window, at the April light, at the new leaves, at the child on the sidewalk below who had stopped to look up at the maple trees, tipping her head back to see where the branches ended and the sky began. She thought about all the places this question had found her over the past 4.5 years. How many different women had answered it? The woman in the parking garage in the November rain, the woman at Dorothy's kitchen table, the woman at the hospital at 3 in the morning with Jackie holding her hand, the woman at the drafting table at 2 in the morning reorganizing everything when she couldn't fix the actual thing, the woman on the February sidewalk, phone in hand, not afraid. All those women were her. She had been all of them, and she had gotten through all of them and arrived here, in this kitchen, at this window, in this April light. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, she said. She paused. I feel like life is still... She stopped. Found the word. Still generous. Even after everything. Still genuinely, unexpectedly generous. Wren put an arm around her. They stood at the window in the April light. Two women who had been friends for 20 years, which meant they had been through everything together and knew that through everything was exactly what friendship meant. You built something really good, Wren said. We did, Claire said. Nora and I. And Fletcher. And Fletcher. And me, Wren said. And you, Claire agreed. Obviously, and you. And Mr. Bellows, Wren said. And Mr. Bellows, Claire said, who drove through a blizzard in his pajamas and never once asked for acknowledgement. The best people never do, Wren said. Outside, the child on the sidewalk was still looking up at the maple trees, taking her time, the way children look at things, fully, without hurry. Life, Claire thought, still worth it, still genuinely, unexpectedly worth it. Later that night, Nora asleep, Fletcher beside her, the apartment quiet in the good way, the way a place is quiet when everyone in it is safe. She lay in the dark with the particular piece of a life that had been built deliberately and well, not without cost, not without pain, but deliberately. Every board tested before her full weight went on it. She thought about all the moments she had not known she would survive. The parking garage in the rain, the hospital at 3 a.m, the Google searches at midnight, the bookshelf in 47 pieces, the portfolio at 2 a.m, the phone ringing from a name she had been afraid of for 4 years. She thought, I knew. She thought, I knew all along that I would. Not because she was exceptional, not because she was fearless, because she had looked at the hardest thing in front of her and kept moving. One day and then the next. Small things and then bigger things. The faucet and the studio and the good pencils and the lemon cake and the February thaw. The accumulation of kept promises to herself. I deserve better than this, she had thought, the night she sat alone at the dinner table with the anniversary wine. I deserve this, she had thought, standing at the fall fair watching Nora on a pony named Sunday. Both were true. Both had always been true. Starting over felt impossible, she thought, and it was also the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because of what it took away, because of what I discovered when it was gone. She breathed in, she breathed out. She put her hand on her stomach. The faintest thought of new and beginning, Nora and beyond Nora. Life continuing in the direction she had never dared to plan for, because she had been too busy surviving, and then too busy building, and now here she was, on the other side of both. She smiled in the dark. She slept. 3 months later, the same coffee shop. She and Nora and Grant. Saturday morning. Their fourth such meeting. The rhythm of it almost familiar now. Nora telling Grant about Detective the hamster's recent adventures. Detective had, apparently, developed strong opinions about the wheel. Grant listened with the focused attention of someone making up for lost time, one Saturday at a time. One cup of coffee at a time, one story about a hamster's opinions at a time. Virginia sat down next to Claire. She had not been invited. She had arrived in Virginia's way, precisely and without announcement. The cream wool coat, the lavender perfume, 40 years of the same perfume. She looked at the table, at her son, who was watching his daughter, with the face of a man who was learning something that had always been there, something that had been waiting for him the entire time he was looking away. He's trying, Virginia said. I know, Claire said. He's going to try harder. I know that too. A pause. Virginia looked at her. The formal exterior exactly what it had always been. But the eyes. Something in the eyes she had not had 4 years ago. Something earned. Something that could only come from having made a mistake you couldn't unmake and then deciding to be better anyway. "I am sorry," Virginia said, "for what my son did, for what the family—" She stopped. "For not being louder about what I saw." Claire looked at her. She thought about what she had said to Grant. "I've already accepted it, not for your sake, for mine." "I know," she said to Virginia. "I do know that." Virginia nodded. She looked at Nora, who had transferred the story of Detective the Hamster to Grant's phone, demonstrating something with photographs, her small finger pointing at the screen, her voice very patient, explaining things to her father the way she explained things to everyone, as though she had important information and it was her job to make sure you understood it correctly. "She's everything," Virginia said. "She is," Claire said. She looked at her daughter's gray-green eyes. Margaret's eyes, 2 generations removed, arriving again in this particular and exact person, and felt the completeness of things that arrive, not because you force them, but because you built the ground for them to land on. Gratitude, she thought, not jubilation, not triumph, just gratitude, deep and quiet and entirely real, the kind you earn, the kind that only exists because you know precisely and from experience what it cost. The April sun came through the coffee shop window and landed on the table between them, warm and specific and present, the way the best things are. Present, not promised, not borrowed, here. Nora looked up and found Claire's eyes across the table. She waved, small and certain, the wave of a child who knows she is seen. "Hi, Mama," Claire waved back. "Hi, love." And outside, on the sidewalk, the April trees were doing that thing. New leaves coming in, small and bright and entirely green, the particular green of things just beginning, of mornings that have not yet decided what they will be, of a life that had been stripped all the way back to bare branches and had, in the fullness of time, found its way back to this, to exactly this. A coffee shop, on a Saturday morning, a daughter waving across a table, a woman who had built her way back from the worst morning of her life to the best one, not despite everything, because of everything. Starting over, she thought one last time, was impossible, and I did it anyway. And look.
And so Claire's story ends, not with revenge, not with a dramatic fall of the man who wronged her, but with something far more powerful, with a daughter waving across a coffee shop table on a Saturday morning, with April light coming through the window, with a woman who looked at her life and thought, still worth it, still genuinely, unexpectedly worth it. That ending didn't come easily. It came after a parking garage in November rain, when she sat alone and finally let herself feel how wrong things had been for a very long time. It came after a hospital at 3 a.m, after Google searches at midnight, after assembling a bookshelf at 2 a.m. because she needed to prove, to no one but herself, that she could still build something solid. It came after one quiet decision: I deserve better than this. Not spoken in anger, not performed for anyone else, just a clear, steady truth she finally stopped running from. Here is what Claire's story teaches us, and what I hope you carry with you. We tell ourselves we're being patient. We tell ourselves we're being practical. We tell ourselves that the discomfort we feel is just hormones or stress or something we should push through. We move around the pain the way you move around furniture in a dark room, carefully, quietly, never looking at it directly. But the furniture is still there, and at some point, usually the point we fear most, life asks us to turn on the light. Claire didn't leave because she was brave. She left because she finally trusted the quiet thing inside her that had been telling the truth all along. And what she found on the other side of that terrifying threshold was not emptiness. It was herself, her work, her daughter, her people, her April light, not despite the loss, because of it. Starting over, true starting over, feels impossible when you're standing at the beginning of it. Your hands are shaking, your future is blank. You don't know what a good day looks like anymore because you've been living around someone else's definition of it for so long. But here is what I want you to hold. For Claire, that was calling her mother. Then finding a studio, then buying good pencils, then building a portfolio at 2 a.m. One small kept promise to herself after another, until one day she looked up and realized she had built an entire life, a real one she chose. That is not a fairy tale. That is what it actually looks like, slow and hard and full of ordinary mornings that quietly become extraordinary ones. If you are in the middle of your own hardest chapter right now, if you are standing in a kitchen holding a coffee you haven't touched, feeling that quiet, certain knowing that something is wrong, I hope Claire's story gave you one thing. You already know. You have known for a while. The question is only, when will you let yourself begin? This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually written and edited by our team to bring you not just a story, but a meaning worth carrying. Every word was chosen with intention. Every chapter was built to remind you of something true, that the life waiting for you on the other side of your hardest decision is more generous than you can imagine right now. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. That alone says something about you.